L Word changed the game for lesbian representation. First airing in 2004, it was the first major TV drama centered on the lives of queer women. For many, it was groundbreaking, proving itself as one of the first pieces of media that queer women could actually see themselves reflected in. But along with this newfound visibility came a polished, sexualized, and often limiting version of queerness, one that prioritized whiteness, wealth, and flamboyant femininity. As Stuart Hall states in The Spectacle of the Other, representation is a practice, a kind of work, which uses material object and effects, but the meaning depends not on the material quality of the sign, but on its symbolic function. The L Word not only reflects queer life, but also constructs the idea of an ideal queerness to viewers in ways that reinforces dominant and often harmful ideologies. For a show that claims to represent the diversity of lesbian community, the L Word mostly centers on a specific kind of queer women, white, femme, and upper to middle class. Stuart Hall describes stereotyping as a practice of fixing identities, often limiting complexity. He states that stereotyping reduces, essentializes, naturalizes, and fixes difference. This is clearly shown in how the L Word constructs its version of queerness, usually putting whiteness and affluence on a pedestal, making it the default lesbian experience. Bet and Tina, the show's model lesbian couple, are portrayed as successful, beautiful, and financially secure. Their storyline reflects a desire for mainstream acceptance rather than radical representation. Characters like Carmen, a Latina love interest for Shane, was often sexualized, presented as fiery and passionate, a trope usually applied to Latina women in media. Hall also discusses how representation works within power hierarchies, stating, "Those who have power to represent also have the power to make the others speak, or to silence them." This is shown in how Kit, the only major black woman in the show, is positioned as an outsider of the main group, rather than an active part of the queer community. It also steered into the hypersexualized portrayals, often catering to the straight male gaze rather than a real representation of queer desire. Laura Mulvey's visual pleasure in narrative cinema explains how traditional film paints women as passive objects of male desire, stating that women are simultaneously looked at and displayed, with their appearance coded for strong visual and erotic impact. This is shown heavily in the L Word, where lesbian sex is often framed in ways that emphasize performativity over intimacy. The first major sex scene of the show between Jenny and Marina is shot using soft lighting, slow-motion shots, and an erotic aesthetic, making it resemble softcore pornography aimed at a straight audience. One of the main characters, Shane, is shown as the androgynous player lesbian character. Mulvey describes how film constructs a to-be-looked-at-ness, where female characters are positioned for visual consumption rather than personal agency. Shane exists as the definition of this paradox, as being both an object of desire and a hypersexualized stereotype of the emotionally detached butch. Despite being a show about LGBTQ identities, the L Word struggled to represent gender diversity in meaningful ways. Instead, it frames transness as tragic and non-conforming identities as weird and usually unlikable characters. Judith Butler, in Gender Trouble, critiques the construction of strict gender categories, arguing that gender identity is a performative act that is regulated by social norms. The L Word, however, reinforces binary gender expectations instead of challenging them. Max's transition, for example, is shown through the lens of discomfort and other characters acting in a way that alienates him. Rather than celebrating gender diversity, the show treats his transition as a grotesque spectacle. Non-binary and gender non-conforming identities are usually not taken seriously. Lisa, a lesbian man, is repeatedly mocked rather than given a valid perspective in the show. The L Word was undoubtedly a huge step for queer media, as it provided visibility at a time where lesbian representation was largely non-existent. But as Hall states, representation is not just about visibility, it's about who gets to be represented and how, and more specifically, how things are represented and the meanings they are given are firmly tied to the systems of power which produce them. In the same way, Mulvey states that cinematic representation is shaped by who creates the media and who the audience is. In many ways, the L Word still caters to straight audiences, reinforcing these traditional power structures, even if it challenges some. It's the way that we live.